Hello everybody, I'm delighted to be here and to participate in this panel presentation about workforce language assessment in the 21st century knowledge economy quality management perspective. As you can see, I and my colleagues Ryan Damrow and Courtney Paul are the second set of presenters on this panel, and the specific topic we're going to be discussing is surveying English language assessment practices in international plurilingual organizations. Unfortunately, Ryan and Courtney can't be here today, but I appreciate all the work that they've done in this project. This research was stimulated by some research that was commissioned by TERF, the International Research Foundation for English Language Education. I happen to have the good fortune to serve as the president and chairman of the board of trustees of this foundation, and I just want to tell you that our current focus is on promoting research and best practices to improve the use of English in our 21st century global knowledge economy. A few years ago, TERF published a survey called The Impact of English and Plurilingualism in Global Corporations. And the report that I'm going to share with you today was stimulated by the findings and some of the research methods of that study. If you're interested in seeing that study, it's available as a free downloadable PDF at TERF's website, which is www.terfonline.org. So let me tell you about the present study that Ryan and Courtney and I have been doing. First of all, I'll discuss the sampling and respondents. We used a very simple questionnaire, which we designed and distributed using SurveyMonkey. As you know, SurveyMonkey is an online questionnaire survey tool. You can use it to design, to distribute, to retrieve, and to partially analyze questionnaire data. When we distributed our questionnaire through SurveyMonkey, we used convenient sampling. That is, we were not working from any existing database. We weren't doing any sort of formal stratified or random sampling. Instead, we were trying to reach as many people as we could who are part of the population that interests us, and that is people working in international plurilingual organizations. The networks that we reached out to included Monterey Institute alumni, Anaheim University alumni and students, international chambers of commerce, the membership of the Global Finance Association, and we also had support from English Career Magazine, which is based in Taiwan. They shared our link with their readers. And we also contacted individuals whom we know to be working in international organizations. The database I'll share with you today comes from the 243 responses we've had to date. So let's look at the organizational sectors that are represented here in slide number 7. Respondents were asked to indicate the sector that best described their own organization, and they were asked to check only one. And you can see, I'll give you a few moments to skim over the slide, you can see that there was a wide range of organizations and sector types included here. The category Other invited people to fill in the type of organization they worked for if they didn't see it represented in the list. And so people added international NGOs, government and diplomacy, law and legal practice, technology and arms control, grant-making, maritime activities, translation and interpretation, as you can see in slide number 8. We were also surprised because people added some sectors that we thought had been covered in the existing list. These included automobile manufacturing, accounting, and telecommunications. We next asked, in what countries does your organization currently operate? And rather than reading this lengthy list, I'll just tell you that in slides 9 and 10, you can see that the countries literally run from A to Z. We have quite a large distribution of corporate and non-governmental organizations operating in a wide range of countries around the world. And these include countries representing what we might call both the developed and the developing world. As you can see in slide number 11, some people simply responded with statements such as too many to name, worldwide, globally, every country of the Caribbean. Some people put a rough number of countries where their organization operates. For example, in 32 countries, or in 36 countries, over 40 countries, over 60 countries. on up to over 190 countries, as you can see. We then asked the respondents to tell us the languages that were used to communicate within the organization. And in this case, we asked them to check all that apply. As you can see from the bar graph in slide 12, the language used the most frequently was English. And the last item in the bar graph there, beyond Spanish, is other, and I'll show you the others in just a minute. The list to the left of the bar graph in slide 12 are the languages that we included on our questionnaire, but we did want to give people a chance to indicate that other languages were used as well. We then asked the respondents, what is the primary language used by the employees in those locations to communicate within your organization? And as you can see, English comes out as being a widely used language in a range of areas. In slide 14, you see the list of other languages which respondents told us were used in their organizations. And again, this is a wide list. I'll give you a moment to scan over it. We next asked our respondents what languages are used to communicate with clients. The previous question was about what languages are used to communicate within the organizations, but here we're focusing on what languages are used to communicate with clients. In slide 15, you can see a bar graph indicating the percent of respondents who identified particular languages. Once again, English comes out as the most frequently used language. But then we asked them, what is the primary language used by your employees in those locations to communicate with clients? The first question, they were invited to indicate any language that was used, all the languages that are used with their clients. But now we're asking, what is the primary language used to communicate with clients? And once again, English comes out to be the main language indicated by these responses. Again, we asked what other languages are used with clients. In addition to those noted above, the respondents added Bulgarian, Hungarian, Malagasy, Malayalam, Kannada, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Lozi, Quechua, Tajik, Telugu, and some wrote too many to name. All right, having told you a little bit about our respondents and the sorts of organizations they represented, let me just tell you about the research questions. The first research question is this: what are the necessary English language skills individuals must possess to be successful as competent employees and leaders in international plurilingual organizations in the 21st century knowledge-based economy? So this question is written out in full form on slide 18 if you'd like to read it over again more slowly. What I'm going to do now is tell you what sorts of responses we got with regard to this particular research question. So we asked the survey respondents to tell us about the use of English for speaking and listening, for writing, and for reading in their organizations. Slides 19 and 20 are dedicated to the kinds of English speaking and listening skills that employees and leaders must have in these organizations. We group speaking and listening together since we so often engage in them simultaneously, though not always. So here you can see we've listed the particular speaking and listening skills in sequence from those indicated the most frequently to those indicated the least frequently. Most frequently was interacting in face-to-face meetings at 88.5% of the respondents. Telephone conversations came up as very important. Listening during face-to-face meetings, listening to presentations, giving presentations, 78%. Listening to teleconferences is apparently important these days. And running face-to-face meetings, all of these received over 70%. International travel comes in strong at 67.9%. On slide 20, you can see a continuation of these same data. Socializing is important, apparently. And then we also invited the respondents to indicate other speaking and listening activities which we hadn't listed. And unfortunately, we haven't analyzed those data yet. Let's look at slide 21. Slide 21 is about the English writing skills needed by employees and managers in these international organizations. And interestingly, writing emails comes out to be the most frequently cited at 95.9%. That is, nearly 96% of the respondents said writing emails is an important English writing skill. You can see other skills listed there: writing correspondence, writing reports, writing proposals, and writing memos. Then there's a big jump down to writing newsletters at only 30%, writing manuals at about 36%. Slide 22 shows the English reading skills that members of international organizations need to possess. And not surprisingly, given the data we just saw about writing, reading emails comes out to be extremely important at 97.1% of the respondents identifying this skill as significant. Once again, reading correspondence, reading reports, reading proposals, and reading memos are important. Reading manuals is more important than writing manuals. Writing manuals was only 35.8%, but reading manuals 65.8%, and reading newsletters just over 60%. So these data in these 4 slides should be helpful to people who are trying to generate curriculum or materials for people who work in international organizations. Now let's look at the second research question, and you'll find it written out on slide 23. What assessment procedures and instruments are used to determine whether such individuals possess the necessary skills to accomplish those roles successfully? So this is the question that is appropriate particularly to this Language Testing Research Colloquium presentation today. Let me give you the responses that we got. These are simple percentages, and most of the questions were set up just to offer the options yes, no, and don't know. As shown in slide 24, the first question was, do you have any English language requirements for any of your employees? 9.5% said no, 81% of the respondents said yes, and the others did not know. In slide 25, you see the question, if you have English language requirements, do they vary by position? And 59% said yes, the English language requirements for employees do vary by position. Slide 26, the question was, are bilingual or plurilingual applicants hired over monolingual applicants with equal skill sets other than their language ability? About 8% said no, but 70% of the respondents said yes. So being bilingual or plurilingual apparently helps people to get hired. However, look at slide 27. Here the question was, are bilingual or plurilingual employees paid more than monolingual employees in the same positions? 41% of the respondents said no, 17% said yes, and the other 41% said that they didn't know. Once again, central to the focus of this particular colloquium today, we asked, do you test the English proficiency of any of your employees using any commercially developed test? And over 60% said no. 13%, only 32 respondents said yes, and 26% said that they didn't know. We asked a subsequent question, if yes, what tests are used? And of those 32 respondents who said their companies or organizations do use commercially developed tests, 6 people said TOEIC was used. TOEFL was identified 4 times. The United Nations proficiency exam was identified twice, and other people cited the U.S. government's oral proficiency interview and the UniCredit group. Each of those were mentioned once. Now, if you look at slide 29, you see the question, do you test the English proficiency of your employees using any in-house procedures? 37% said no, but almost an equal amount, 36.6% or 89 respondents said yes, and over 27% said they didn't know. The follow-up question here was, if you answered yes, what procedures are used? And the procedures that were listed were in-house interviews, some writing samples, a speech recognition tool identified by one person, and translating documents identified by another. And we got some interesting comments here in response to the question, do you test the English proficiency of your employees using any in-house procedures? If you look at slide 30, you'll see some of the answers. One person wrote, there is no formal procedure, but the application and interview process can weed out potential contractors whose English abilities are weak. Another person said, we don't use any official test, but through the interview process and writing samples, we are able to assess language ability. One person said that candidates for employment take a financial test in English. Slide 31 continues the comments. One person wrote that the Human Resources Department develops language tests for English or the relevant language for the project depending on the position. Another said that there's no specific procedures except for conversation. Another person said, we talk to them. If they speak English well enough to communicate with management, they pass. Now let's look at slide 32. The respondents were asked, if you use any in-house testing procedures, what training is given to the test administrators? There were 75 responses to this item. Among them, 26 people said none, 14 said they didn't know or weren't sure, and 5 said not applicable. There were several interesting comments in response to the question, if you use any in-house testing procedures, what training is given to the test administrators? Looking at slide 33, we can see some of these comments. One said, none, testing would be very simple. Another said, the interviewer is the experienced one. A third said, the administrators do the test based on their experience in the area tested. Another said, the interviewer must speak English fluently. Another said, the Japanese manager simply uses his own personal criteria of what defines good English. And my personal favorite, someone wrote, most are PhDs in linguistics. Now let's turn to slide 34. The respondents were asked, think about some employees in your organization who are bilingual or plurilingual. Have the bilingual or plurilingual skills of those employees had a positive impact on your organization? 4.5% of the respondents said no, but a whopping 82.3% said yes. 13.2% said they didn't know. Now, the opposite question in slide 35. Think about some employees in your organization who are not bilingual or plurilingual. Has the lack of bilingual or plurilingual skills of those employees had a negative impact on your organization? 40% said no, 27% said yes, 32% said they didn't know. The good news, on slide 36, respondents were asked, does your organization support employees in the improvement of their second or foreign language skills? And as you can see, 59% said yes, 28% said no, 14% didn't know. But 59% of the respondents said yes, the organization does support employees who wish to improve their language skills. Now let's look at slide 37. This is an interesting situation. We asked respondents, does your organization calculate return on investment for language development? That is, if there is some sort of language development incentive or program involved in the organization, how can organizations tell if that program or effort is effective? What is the improvement as a result of that language development initiative? So 54.5% said their organization does not calculate return on investment. Only 7.1% said yes, and 39%, nearly 40%, said that they didn't know. Thinking about that small percentage, 7.1% of the respondents, let's look at slide number 38. If you answered yes to the previous question, please check all the methods for calculating return on investment that apply. Change in the quality of work and change in time needed to complete tasks were both identified by 71.4% of that small 7% of the respondents who said their organizations do calculate return on investment. Other areas identified: change in the quantity or the output of work, change documented by experts such as supervisors, personnel managers, and so on, change in cost, and then 20% said other. So it's interesting to me to see that companies or organizations are apparently willing to invest in supporting organizations' improvement of their language skills. Nearly 60% of the respondents said their organizations were, but only 7% of those organizations calculate return on investment. So let me wrap this up with a few closing comments. In summary, as you can see on slide 39, 70% of the respondents said that bilingual or plurilingual applicants do get hiring preference. 81% said there are English language requirements for employees. Only 13.2% of the respondents report that their organization uses commercially developed language. As shown in slide 40, 59.3% of the respondents reported that their organization does provide language development support for employees, but only 7.1% said that the organization calculates the return on investment for such training. Slide 41. About 95% of the respondents report that English is used as a language of communication within the organization and as a language of communication with clients. Then, looking at slide 42, over a third report that their organization uses some kind of in-house procedure or procedures to assess employees' English proficiency. Of the 75 respondents who report using some kind of in-house procedure, at least a third, n equals 26, reported that no training is provided for test administrators. In slide 43, over 75% of the respondents say that English is the primary language used to communicate within the organization, and about 2/3 say English is the primary language used to communicate with clients. Now, we need to be careful here because this figure may represent sampling bias. You'll recall that a number of the respondents came from our networks at the Monterey Institute of International Studies and Anaheim University. So these are both English-speaking universities. Clearly, people who graduate from these organizations are going to go out and work. It's quite likely that they'll work in organizations where English is used. So we need to make sure that we don't overemphasize the importance of English as the primary language being used. Surprisingly to me, relatively few organizations in this small data set reported using TOEIC or other professionally developed language tests. Now, I'd like to make a point in slide 44, connecting these ideas to the comments from Nick Seville and Mike Milanovich's presentation about quality management systems in language assessment. To me, it seems that little attention is paid to the quality of language assessment by many of the international organizations whose employees and managers responded to our survey. And this leads me to a further thought. Many business schools do use the quality management systems framework, so it may be that this is a familiar framework for people in business and industries. And that might be a good reason why we in language assessment should use the quality management system as a framework for talking to people in business contexts. A minute ago I mentioned a sampling problem. Let's look at slide 45. There are some limitations to the study, of course. First of all, as of today, we haven't analyzed the qualitative data fully. We hope to gather more data from additional organizations and individuals. The use of convenient sampling means that we can't make any claims about the representativeness of our data. And also, I'd like to point out that the regional and sector distribution is a bit uneven at this time. We're not quite sure what to do with the don't know answers. It could be that we have approached people who aren't the best people in an organization to answer, though we did ask respondents, if you are not the right person to complete this survey, would you please pass it on to the person who would be appropriate. We're not sure if we should exclude responses from organizations that are language-based. So, for example, some of the respondents work in companies whose function is translation and interpretation. It may be that those organizations are not typical of or characteristic of the kinds of organizations that would be using language assessment tools of the sort with which we are all familiar. Finally, we approached individuals, and so our data come from individual respondents as opposed to individual organizations as the source of data. And now we're wondering what to do with multiple responses from the same organization. So, for example, we had several responses from IBM. Which ones do we use? Which ones do we exclude? In cases where the responses from the same organization are inconsistent, which ones should we choose? So thank you very much for listening today. Let me just wrap up by showing you my final slide. And a reminder to visit www.turfonline.org. One of the tools there that might be useful to you is that we have a variety of reference lists on various language assessment topics. And there's also a rather lengthy reference list on language in business, industry, and the professions, if this topic is one that is important to you. When you go to the TURF website, click on Access to Resources, and then on References, and there you will find a number of downloadable Word documents in APA format. And these are free. You're most welcome to share this resource with other people, your students and colleagues. So thank you very much for your attention. And at the end of the panel presentation, I'd be happy to address any questions or comments you may have.